One of the questions that's asked most often here on my videos is, how much does it actually cost to run a full stack of servers out in my garage? Next question. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. I have a problem. I like servers, and at this point I have 7 servers running in the rack out in my garage, plus a dedicated Trip Lite 7KRM air conditioner to help keep everything cool. As you might imagine, those servers require a ton of power, which I happily added with the help of 2 dedicated 20-amp circuits last year. Power delivery to the rack isn't the problem I have, it's limited UPS capacity. You see, when your server rack starts with just a couple physical boxes and a handful of hard drives, it's pretty easy to keep the total power draw at around 300 watts. In just over 2 years, I've ballooned from 2 home-built servers and 8 hard drives to a whopping 7 servers, 36 hard drives, 20 plus SSDs, and give or take about 3/4 of a terabyte of memory. As such, my 1500 VA APC UPS unit just isn't holding up anymore. If I have all my servers running at the same time, just the idle power draw is somewhere around 1100 watts. The APC is only capable of continuously delivering 1000 watts, and in reality should be kept closer to 800 if possible. And that 1100 watt load is only coming from the servers in the rack. I have the air conditioner running on the second 20 amp circuit, which pulls around 500 to 700 watts on its own during the summer. So, while the last year was all about expansion, I think my current vibe is going to be about a little consolidation. And that starts today with an upgrade that is, admittedly, entirely overkill, but we'll take the services from 4 servers and cram them all into a single box. One of the biggest power draws out in my server rack is my NAS box, which can easily pull down 500 watts on its own, even when sitting at idle. And while the hard drives certainly contribute to that, the motherboard and CPU combo I have in there right now isn't exactly sipping on the amps either. Currently powering my TrueNAS box is a Supermicro X9 ADI dual-socket motherboard and a pair of Xeon E5 4627V2 CPUs, along with 64GB of DDR3 1866 memory. And all it's doing is running the NAS. It's overkill most of the time, but as I edit video directly off the NAS using a 10GB link, RAM and single-threaded CPU performance were pretty critical. So, what am I going to be replacing that hardware with? Well, you all know this server right here. This is my cloud gaming server, or at least it was until I replaced it about a month ago. Inside this is an AMD EPYC 7601 32-core CPU, 256GB of DDR4 ECC registered memory, all running on a Supermicro H11 SSL-I motherboard. One of the goals in my server rack has always been to virtualize TrueNAS full-time, not just as a one-off experiment that I've done a couple videos on, and I think I finally have the hardware that I'm comfortable doing that with. So today we're going to replace the power-hungry dual Xeon Ivy Bridge NAS motherboard with some AMD EPYC goodness. Jumping to the EPYC hardware will allow me to allocate a full 128GB of memory to TrueNAS while still having enough headroom to run all the other services I use here at home. This will also eliminate the need for the trio of Hive Zeus boxes higher up on the rack that are currently running all of my VMs. Each of those Hive Zeus servers has 64GB of DDR3 ECC memory and a pair of Ivy Bridge Xeon CPUs. While they still do an amazing job, and I still do recommend picking them up if you're building out a home lab, when I've got 96 cores worth of EPYC just sitting around doing nothing, it's kinda silly to leave the Ivy Bridge systems in place. So today I'm going to take this EPYC 7601, install it into my NAS chassis, install Proxmox, and get TrueNAS Scale up and running inside a virtual machine. Oh, right, by the way, I'll be installing the Debian-based TrueNAS Scale for reasons we'll get into at the end of the video. But for right now, let's get to swapping all this hardware around. You know what's nice about taking 6 hours to replace all the hardware inside your server? You can open a second beer. Welcome back. It's only been about 6 or 7 hours since I started this project. A couple of things went wrong, a couple of things went right, and the server is now up and running. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Jumping on over into Proxmox here, you can see I booted this thing up about a half hour ago and finally got it up and running. Our EPYC CPU is recognizing all 32 cores and 64 threads, and all 256 gigabytes of memory is showing up just fine. Now I am running the most up-to-date version of Proxmox 6.4, that is update number 13. However, I have not yet upgraded to Proxmox 7, and the reason being is, as far as I know, the vGPU unlock script to allow me to partition my NVIDIA cards is not yet functioning on version 7. So I am sticking with version 6 for now, as there are a couple things that I want to do inside this server that involve splitting up my GPU. But that's not why we're here today. Today we are here to get TrueNAS Scale up and running inside of a virtual machine with actual hardware running behind it. So the first thing I'm going to do is upload the ISO image into my storage repository so we can get started on the install. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my TrueNAS Scale beta ISO and get that uploaded. With that done, we can go ahead and create a new virtual machine. So I'm going to right click on my Proxmox server and go to Create VM. We'll go ahead and give this an ID of 201, and we'll name it craft-TrueNAS. For the CPU, I'm going to go ahead and give this thing 16 CPU threads to work with. And for the memory, it is go big or go home. That is 131,072 or 128 gigabytes. And I'm going to turn off ballooning device, as I want all of the memory allocated to this machine 100% of the time, so it can use it for ZFS cache space. For our network adapter, we're going to leave that alone, and then finish. And we'll go ahead and double click on that, allow pop-ups, and start it up. So we're going to go ahead and run the installer. I'm going to install it on the only hard drive that is available, that is SDA, or the 32 gigabyte boot drive that we created. And here's where we enter our root password, so forgive me, but I'm going to black out your screen really quick while I type that in. And now, we just wait for this to finish up. And that did not take long at all, so let's go ahead and hit OK, and then we will reboot our system. While that's rebooting, I'm going to go ahead and unmount that ISO image so it doesn't get confused in the future. Now while this is starting up for the first time, I'm going to talk about the difference between TrueNAS Scale and TrueNAS Core. I've been running TrueNAS Core, and TrueNAS Core is the version that you all probably know and love. TrueNAS Scale is a new endeavor by TrueNAS that does away with the BSD core of the old TrueNAS and introduces the Debian core, which is the same thing that we use on Ubuntu, Pop! OS, and a number of different operating systems. And that didn't take long at all, and now that it's started up, I'm actually going to shut it down. And I know that sounds weird, but you'll see why in just a second. Now on this Proxmox server, I have already set up IOMMU and VFIO for PCI Express pass-through, as I do that with pretty much all of my Proxmox servers. I'm not going to cover that process now because I've done that a number of times in the past. Rather, if you want to click the link down in the video description, I will have written instructions on how to enable IOMMU inside of Proxmox. But right now, there are a couple PCI Express devices that I want to pass through into TrueNAS, starting with the HBA controller that I have, and that is a Dell HBA 330. There it is. So technically, the Dell HBA 330 is nothing more than an LSI SAS 3008 controller, which is an 8-port SAS 3 controller, and I've got it set in IT mode already. So I'm going to click PCI Express and All Functions and click on Add. The other thing I'm going to pass through right away is one of the 10 gigabit network ports on my dual 10 gig card, and that should be this guy right here, the QLogic number 2. And again, PCI Express, and we'll click on Add. Now I didn't check all functions when I passed through the network card because I only wanted one of the ports of the network card forwarded through. They show up as two separate devices, but they do share a PCI bus. If you click all functions, it forwards everything on that PCI bus to the virtual machine, which would mean I would lose my 10 gig network port inside of Proxmox. So why am I forwarding one of my 10 gigabit ports? Well, if you remember back to my how do I back up all of my servers video, I use a dedicated 10 gig port to connect to my backup server, which means when I'm running backups at night, it's not going to interfere on the network with any other bandwidth. So all of my other services run unencumbered, and my backups can still run on their own dedicated 10 gig line. Now that we have our devices passed through, I can go ahead and start TrueNAS back up. So I'm going to double click that and click on Start. Remember how I was talking about how I don't want to forward the port for my network card that's on Proxmox because I would lose connection to Proxmox. Apparently, 60.01 was the network card for Proxmox, not the network card that I wanted to forward for TrueNAS's backup. So I just killed the network connection to my Proxmox server. I'm going to run out to the garage, and I'll be right back. Hey, look, it works again. I think we can continue now. So let's go ahead and remove host PCI device 61.00.1. Yes. And I'm going to add PCI device 61.00.0 and hit add. And if this doesn't work, that means I can't split that network card, but I'm kind of hoping I can. So I'm going to hit start again, and we'll see if I lose connection again. Okay, I can't forward that network card. Now we know. Now, there are some network cards that you can forward just a single port for, and in this case, I thought I could because it did show up as two independent devices. However, in this case, it seems like they share an onboard chip, which cannot be split, and so either it's forwarding the port and then disabling the chip, or the chip doesn't know what to do and just turns off itself. Either way, I'm going to go back out to my garage and reboot the server again. All right, and now we wait until it starts pinging again. The problem with 256 gigabytes of RAM and an EPYC 32-core CPU, it takes like 2 or 3 minutes to post. It's faster than my 64-core EPYC CPU, which takes like 5 minutes to post. All right, we're back in business. Again. All right, so let's go ahead and remove that PCI device. I think I will explore that in another video on how to dedicate a network port inside of Proxmox to a virtual machine without using PCI Express passthrough. So I guess make sure you're subscribed if you want to see the finale to that whole endeavor. But for right now, let's go ahead and continue on with just the HBA. Now, do note, I will be passing on more devices than just the HBA, just not today. And there we go, TrueNAS Scale. Now do note, TrueNAS Scale is still in beta. You should not run this in a production environment. The only reason I'm running it is I have pretty darn good backups, and I can run my files directly off of my backup server. So there's really no such thing as downtime unless I lose both at the same time. If there is a problem with TrueNAS Scale, I can always revert back to TrueNAS Core, and my data is fine. So, you have been warned. All right, we are booted into TrueNAS Scale. First thing I'm going to do is give this thing a static IP address, and I'm going to select Network Interface 1. We are not going to remove the current settings. We are not going to configure for DHCP. Yes, I want to configure IPv4. Network name is ENS18, which is the name it already had. We're going to give this an IP address of 10.0.0.221/24. And we do not need to configure IPv6 on my internal network. Next thing we're going to do is set up our default route, and that is our default gateway. So option 4, we're going to configure our IPv4 static route, and that is going to be 10.0.0.1. First up is our DNS domain. So I'm going to enter craft.local, which is what I named my... So this is definitely a bug. When you hit backspace, it doesn't remove the backspace. It adds the character that you tried to backspace from. So forgive me for this, but my local DNS name is craft.local. There we go. DNS name server 1 is 10.0.0.1, and I do not have a DNS server 2. And if everything checks out, I should be able to go to the shell, so option number 9, and I should be able to ping google.com. Hey look, I have an internet connection and DNS resolution. That is good enough for me. And that's pretty much all we need to do on the command line side of things. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the web GUI, and we'll get to configuring my new TrueNAS box. So once again, we set up an IP address of 10.0.0.221. And here is our new splash screen. Now, this should look very familiar to everyone who has used TrueNAS before. However, TrueNAS Scale does have some very interesting new features, including a pretty fully fleshed out virtualization system. I've not gone through any bit of testing on this, but it is using the standard KVM virtualization system, which is actually what Proxmox uses for virtualization. So this is definitely something I'm going to be checking out in the future, but I didn't want to rely on it on a primary basis quite yet. But just like other TrueNAS systems, there are apps available, so you can download these one-click installs of very common applications like a Plex server or Nextcloud. And everything else is essentially in the same place, just with a little bit more of a polished look to it. And there's a little bit more central management to the system than there was with TrueNAS Core. This is meant to be replicated across multiple enterprises or multiple locations, a little bit easier than TrueNAS Core was. But onto the configuration. If I go on over to storage, normally I would click on Create Pool and I would select from a subset of hard drives here. Now, I am importing my hard drives into TrueNAS Scale from TrueNAS Core, as in there's already a ZFS file system on my hard drives, and I kind of want to save that, because my data is important. So rather than creating a new pool, I'm actually just going to import the old configuration from my TrueNAS Core server. To do that, I'm going to click on System Settings, go to General, and then up on Manage Configuration, pull that down, and click on Upload File. I'm going to click on Choose File, and then I'm going to choose my most recent backup, which surprisingly enough was today at 1:30, or about 8 hours ago. So click on that and click on Open and Upload. And now all I have to do is wait, and hopefully when TrueNAS Scale reboots, all of my drives and drive shares will automatically be reconfigured for me. And after only about 10 minutes to import all of my existing storage pools, you can see that TrueNAS Scale is booted back up and should hopefully have all of my existing configurations. So again, I'm going to log on in, and there we go. You can see all 3 of my storage pools have imported successfully. If I go over to storage, there they are in all of their glory with all of their data. And if I go down to shares, we should have all of my SMB shares imported as well. And indeed we do. Now, the keen-eyed among you have probably already noticed that all of my pools are reporting as unhealthy, and there's a pretty good reason for that. I imported all of my drives into TrueNAS, but I didn't import my cache disks into TrueNAS Scale. The reason being is, number one, I didn't have enough PCI Express slots to add all of my cache disks back into the new server. And reason two is I'm actually going in a new direction for my cache drives. If you remember back to a couple months ago, I took a look at these. These are SanDisk Fusion I/O memory modules. They were typically sold to first-party servers like Dell, HP, or Lenovo as a flash accelerator for large format storage. Now in that video, I went through some of the problems getting these working, as in there were a lot of problems getting them working. They will only run inside of Windows if you want to use it as a storage disk, and there's virtually no drivers available if you want to run them on Linux. However, in the couple of months since that video, I actually discovered a GitHub repository with an open source reverse engineered set of drivers that works with both VSL3 and VSL4 drives. And they work inside of Linux. More specifically, they'll work inside of the Debian core. So while TrueNAS Core is not able to run these as cache disks, TrueNAS Scale, running on the all-new Debian core, definitely can. So make sure to tune into my next video, and I'm going to go over how to compile your own driver and get these running as a cache drive inside of TrueNAS Scale. So, Fusion I/O drives, how to use NVIDIA vGPU profiles as an NVENC encoder inside of Plex, and more coming up very soon on the channel. As always, if you're interested in any of the hardware that I showed off today, I will have Amazon affiliate links down in the video description. Make sure you go give those a look. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me on what I do, head on over to craftcomputing.store, get yourself some official merch like a pint glass, shirts, or more. If you want the opportunity to chat directly with me, think about joining my Patreon or Float Plane. Links are also down in the video description. You'll get exclusive access to my Discord server, where you can chat with myself as well as the other hosts from Talking Heads. That's going to do it for me in this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. That one's not very good. Beer for today is from Matchless Brewing Company right here in Oregon. It is the Plug and Play Hazy IPA. And yes, I bought this one just for the can art. Just like you can buy this pint glass just for the art over at craftcomputing.store. Normally I expect better from Matchless. This just isn't that good. It's a hazy IPA without a lot of citrus and without a lot of hops. It's kind of like a acidy, malty thing. I mean, it's drinkable, but I'm not exactly enjoying it either. I think that's going to be a hard pass on the second pint. Beer for today is the Kung Fu Karaoke IPA, and the can art is absolutely phenomenal on this can. This is from the Kings County Brewers Collective in Brooklyn, New York. That's not bad. It's got this little weird funk to it. That malt is a little weird. I don't hate it, but it's a little weird. Whoa. I think I know why that was funky. There's a crap ton of sediment at the bottom that just turned this into a hazy. So I think I was getting half hazy. Yep, now it's a hazy IPA. You see how dark that was? It's like 3-week-old orange juice pouring into my glass. Oh, that looked disgusting. And that is not a pleasant color for a beer. It's just not. That did add a little bit of flavor right up front. Not going to say it was a good flavor. It's not often I will open a second beer on the show because I don't like the look of me drinking 2 beers, even though I rarely drink 2 beers in a day anyway. Except on Wednesdays. Wednesday's different. But it's even more rare that I go 0 for 2. I'm just not digging this one. Now, whether it's settled and all I was getting was the malt, and then I got, the lactose and the acid kind of poured in afterwards. This is a New England IPA. It's a hazy IPA. It is a very hazy, not overly pleasant looking IPA. This literally looks like I went to like a dirty river and scooped some mud up off the bottom. And that's what it looks like. I mean, it's just not a good look. It kind of tastes like dirt. There's no real citrus or real great flavors that are poking through. It's just okay. Ignore that take. Just like I kind of want to ignore that beer.